Hey everyone, welcome back to Add to Your Faith Ministries Synoptic Gospel Study. I'm Elizabeth Lenu-Bardhan, and today we are continuing in Matthew chapter 20 with the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. Now this is where the popular quote, waiting for the 11th hour, or an 11th hour of something, meaning at the last minute, that expression comes from this parable. Now there are no synoptic parallel passages in Matthew, Mark, in Mark, Luke, or John, and so we'll only be reading in Matthew today. Now, starting in verse 1 of chapter 20. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, Why do you stand here idle all day? They said to him, Because no one has hired us. He said to them, You go into the vineyard too. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. And when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, These last worked only 1 hour, and you gave them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to one of them, Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I chose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last. All right, I think this really has some applications for life today that we all need to hear. But let's start with what Jesus is doing. He's establishing this simile of what is the kingdom of heaven. So he starts with the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he tells a story. So the story is supposed to help us understand what the kingdom of heaven is similar to. That's why it's called simile. So for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now, one thing that will help us understand this is the time. So it says he goes out early in the morning, and then the 9th hour, and then the 11th hour, the 3rd hour, and the 9th hour, and the 11th hour. So to kind of get an idea of what is happening here, first of all, these workers were doing about a 12-hour day. The ones that started early in the morning, because that would have been around 6 or 7 in the morning. So he goes out early and gets workers. And then he goes again at the 3rd hour, which is 9 a.m. And then he goes again at the 6th hour, which is noon. He goes again at the 9th hour, which is 3 p.m. And then he goes the last time at the 11th hour, which would have been 5 p.m., with work ending at 6 p.m. So you have people that have worked maybe 6 to 6, and you have people that worked 5 to 6. So that's the situation we're looking at with all these times. Get some reference on what kind of work day we're talking about. Now, when he went out early in the morning, like around 6 a.m., he offered the laborers the normal day laborer pay, which was work 12 hours and get 1 denarius. The denarius as a standard full day of work pay. Okay, this was basically minimum wage. You work a day, this is what you get, a denarius. Now, if we thought about it in modern day times, if the lowest level laborer is given just basic minimum wage in the States, that's around $7.25 for day laborers, as of 2021 when I checked on Google. So if you worked 12 hours a day at that, you would make around $87. Okay, so, $85 to $87 of just kind of this is standard for a 12-hour work day, what a basic laborer should get. Okay, so it's less than 100, like I said, around $87. Now, what we have is the owner of the vineyard went out early in the morning and offered a denarius for a day of labor. And those people agreed for the denarius and went and did a day of labor. But then he went back at 9 a.m. and he did the same again. But what he said was, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. Now, whatever is right is such an interesting expression because he didn't actually say what he is going to give. It was just whatever is right. Now, whatever is right implies a denarius because that was the standard day's pay, but he didn't actually say. He's saying whatever is fair, whatever is honest, whatever is right, that's what I'll pay you. And the workers were like, okay. Now, I probably would assume that these workers did not expect a full denarius because that's what was given to someone who worked 12 hours. So he said, whatever's fair, like basically what you work, you'll be paid the fair amount. They all agreed to that, and he kept going to the marketplace at 9, at 12, at 3, and he kept calling to them and offering that. And even the last one, he went to them and said, why are you just standing here at 5 p.m. and you haven't worked all day? And they said to him, because no one has hired us. So he said to them, you go into the vineyard too. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last and up to the first. So the vineyard owner went back to the market, and there were still men who had not worked all day. It was, again, 5 p.m. They're standing around. He's like, why are you not working? They're like, no one hired us. We didn't have a chance to work. So he said, go ahead, go to the vineyard, and I'll pay you what's fair. The same thing he had said to everybody. And then he told his foreman, bring all the laborers in, start with the guys who've just got here, and then end with the guys who've been here since 6 a.m. Now, what happened? Verse 9. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Whoa. They worked 1 hour. Actually, it says about the 11th hour. So they would have got there a little bit after the 11th hour because he went and found them at the 11th hour. So they didn't even work a full hour. They got a whole denarius. So what was the response to that? Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. There's a key point of this story today is an assumption. Think of that word, assumption. And we're going to come back to that. So they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled. Grumbled. Writing that word down. We have an assumption that resulted in grumbling. They grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. We are so mistreated. It isn't fair. That's what they're saying. We've worked all day long, 12 hours. We've worked all day in this burning heat. And these guys just showed up and you gave them a full day's wage? And then you gave us the same? That's not fair. Okay. But he replied to one of them, friend, I love that. Talk about how to diffuse a complicated situation of some negative emotions. He was kind. Friend. He didn't correct him in the sense of like, you idiot. There was no name calling or negativity. He starts with friend. I am doing you no wrong. That's the reality. I'm not doing you any wrong. There's nothing I'm doing wrong here. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Oh, yeah. Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So another word that comes up is begrudge. Begrudge. And then he makes this profound statement. So the last will be first and the first last. Okay. A assumption resulted in grumbling. and begrudging. What is begrudging? Begrudging is envying a possession or enjoyment of another or of something. Envying the possession or enjoyment of something. I am so mistreated. It's not fair. Why do they get to have that and I don't? Assumptions, grumbling, begrudgment, greed, and comparison. Jesus, I think, is covering a lot of different things about the kingdom and about life in general that's important for us to consider. How many times do you feel this sense of missing out? That someone else has something better than you? That their life is better? That their possessions are better? Their relationships are better? Their money is better? Their vacations are better? Whatever. When you start comparing yourself to other people and making assumptions about how they get to do what they do or why you don't get to do what you do, you make assumptions about what you deserve versus what they deserve. Then you begin to envy what they have or their enjoyment of something and become greedy for what you don't have, resulting in your unmet assumptions, resulting in that grumbling, bitter frustration coming out as you compare yourself and ends up with that begrudging spirit. Fair. There's something about our human nature that really wants everything to be fair. If you get to have it, I should get to have it. And that's not biblical. That's not a kingdom mindset. A kingdom mindset is if God wants to bless somebody with his own generosity, we don't have a right to be envious of someone getting what we get with less effort. Jesus' generosity is his generosity. God's grace and God's mercy and God's kindness poured out on anyone he wants to in a generous favor is not something that we are supposed to compare ourselves to. Christian life is not a competition. Nothing in life should be a competition when we're working with other people. We're not supposed to be comparing ourselves or trying to prove ourselves on who's better or who deserves something more. And again, these assumptions that are made by these people, well, if he worked 1 hour and got a day's wage, then I should get 12 times that because I've worked 12 hours. And then from that assumption, when it was not fulfilled because they got the day's wage that they agreed to, then they were upset and they're like, what are you doing? Why are you paying him for 1 hour of work and only paying me what we agreed on? That fear of missing out, that I've agreed to something that was a bad idea. I should have just stood around all day and done nothing, and then I could have gotten the same reward as this person is instead of working hard in the heat. They focus on, we worked in the burden of the day and the sun. So that sense of, I suffered, so I deserve more. That is a human nature response. That is wrong. It is sinful. It's not the kingdom mindset that Jesus wants us to have. And Jesus quickly corrects it and says, I haven't done you any wrong. You agreed to work a day's work for a day's pay. So take your money and go. If I choose to be generous to somebody, why do you begrudge me that? How do we do this in life? How do we begrudge what God is doing in someone else's life as we look at what he's doing in our life? I think if we misunderstand what God is doing, how he rewards, what's the point of living a godly life and having reward for that, having a relationship with Jesus, and somehow we misunderstand and we start getting greedy for more. If someone else shows that they've had a blessed life, maybe they were more sinful or they made bad choices and you think of yourself as a better person, and then they get blessed, you're like, oh, well then I deserve God's blessing too because I've done even this, We're not supposed to compare time and victory. If you've been a Christian for your entire life, maybe you've been a Christian for 50 years, and a new believer just became a Christian, they come into church and they've been given gifts that are big, like they're a wonderful teacher or they're a fantastic singer, and you're like, I've been a Christian my entire life and I've never gotten that understanding, or I've never gone that kind of gifting, and you see them with so much blessing, like it's not fair. Anytime you look at another person and your response is it's not fair, that is not the kingdom mindset. We're never supposed to be focused on fair. Fair is not how Jesus works. He works in love and generosity. My response should be, wow, look how God is blessing that person. Look how God is loving on that person today. How great, because I love that person, because that's our call, is to love people. Then I'm excited that God is loving on that person. They are getting something generous from God. And I'm getting exactly what God told me He would do. That's not God not loving you. He's also providing for your needs. He provided for all of these people exactly what He said He would. What was right. The ones who said they would work a whole day for a denarius got a denarius for the whole day. That was right. The other people He chose to be generous to. And our human nature can just be like, it's not fair. Why? It's God's money. Now, if He decided that the person who worked 12 hours would get a denarius, but He didn't give them that much, they agreed to it and He didn't give it to them, then that would not be right. That's why He says, I'll give you what is right. So what they agreed to, they were paid. So it's God's generosity and it's His right. It's His money. It's His blessings. It's His mercy. It's His grace. And however He gives it out is beautiful. And we should rejoice with the people who are rejoicing. God's pouring out blessing on them. He is providing for their needs. He's giving them wonderful experiences. We shouldn't look and be like, why does God let them have money for a vacation? He doesn't give me money for a vacation. Why does God give them blah, blah, blah? He doesn't give me blah, blah, blah. That sense of I am missing out. I deserve it. Assumption. So therefore I should get it. Grumbling. Why do they have it? Comparison. I deserve it. Greed. I've worked hard for this. I've been through a lot. Self-pity. None of those things are motivated by the Holy Spirit. And yet they're a very natural phenomenon from the human nature, and we have to fight that. Fight those feelings. Fight that sense of finding your worth and value in how God rewards. Oh, well, God must really value them. He gives them more. He must not value me. Wrong assumption. God values us all. He is generous to us all. He is merciful to us all. But how that looks in each person's life is allowed to be different because we are each individual people who have a relationship with Jesus Christ. He doesn't have to give everybody the exact same thing. I think somehow, culturally, we've come to this place that if a parent doesn't give all their kids the exact same thing, then they're a bad parent because it's unfair. Look at Jacob. He gave Joseph the coat of many colors, and the rest of the brothers lost their minds, tried to kill him, sold him into slavery. Nobody likes the sense of unfairness, but that unfairness doesn't equal ungodliness. What it shows is greed and comparison and grumbling and false assumptions. So, what else does this passage show us today? Don't believe the hype. Social media is a tool that we all use to communicate, but it can also be a tool that Satan uses to destroy our peace. What happens, I talk to a lot of different women, and I hear this often, and I see it possible in my own life as well, is we start comparing ourselves to people on social media. Especially this time of year, it's summer, and people are all going on vacation, and you're like, how do they afford a trip to Europe and a trip to Disney? You're like, I don't understand. Well, you don't understand. You don't know their lives. Those people may be in debt. They may have been saving for years. They may have been gifted it by someone else. You don't know what's going on with them. All you see is a few pictures on Facebook. You make an assumption about what that means. You draw a conclusion that it should mean the same thing for you. In your imaginary world of what you've created is happening to them. And then you get mad at God for not doing what you have just created in your mind. Example, someone's gone to Disney one week and the next week you see them in London. And you're like, wow, that job they work must really make a lot of money. Maybe if I did that job, or if my husband did that job, then we would have enough money. Why doesn't my husband do that? He works another job that doesn't let us have all this vacation time. I'm so mistreated. Why doesn't God just give me what I want? God, you should do that. Now that chain pattern of comparison and false regret due to false assumption of suffering and all of this spiral that leads to being angry at God, and that what I just went through, angry at the husband for not providing differently, angry at other people for having fun that you didn't get to have. Now that's what happened here. When you look at someone else with greed and envy and begrudging, then you do not have a kingdom mindset. So we have to really watch our social media interaction. When you're seeing people's photos, when you're seeing their videos, you're seeing their life, are you comparing yourself to them and assuming that you deserve the same, or that somehow they don't deserve what they're having, you're suffering somehow, you're mistreated somehow, etc. Now on the flip side, if you're the one who's getting all the fun adventures and are posting great stuff, be careful that you don't post it in a way that is dishonest. Most people don't post whatever they're going through to be able to get to do those things. Like if you've been saving money for 5 years and you're finally getting to that vacation, but you don't say that, it's kind of I want people to just assume I'm rich. And then, maybe. Now, we don't have to always post everything about our lives simply because people might believe the wrong thing. I am not responsible for every single person who might believe the wrong thing. But I am responsible for my own motivation and my own heart. Am I trying to post things in a way that makes other people greedy or other people discontent with their lives? Or am I just sharing my life in a way that others can rejoice with me in what God is doing? And I think only you know your motivation. From a post, no one can tell which way you are. You know how God is working in your heart, and we all have to evaluate our own motivations in our own heart, both in how we view others and how we project ourselves to others. A lot of people also post about things that they think are unfair in the world. If the politics, the government, the nation, the church, if any organized thing starts doing something that people think is unfair, or they're suffering somehow because they're having to do more than they think is right, like taxes or whatever, then they start spreading this idea of discontentment that I deserve better, you deserve better, those people shouldn't get that, the rich shouldn't be rich because the poor is poor, and that sense of greediness and grumbling and comparison, rather than just saying, God has blessed me with what he's given me, I'm glad he's blessed them with what he's given them. Instead, it's they don't have the right to be blessed if I don't get to be blessed. And you just have all of this spreading, again, mostly on social media, where everyone's just vomiting all these negative ideas and sin nature all over their Facebooks and Pinterests and Instagrams and whatever other whatnots. I'm getting to that age where I'm like, there's a lot of aspects that I am totally too old for now. What's that? There's Twitter, and there's a Twitch, and what's that one that they do all the videos on? I don't know. Anyway, the one that China is supposedly hacking a bunch of people. Whatever it is, there's a lot of different ways that people display their lives and try to get attention on social media. And as we watch those things, as we engage in all of this content, we have to watch our hearts. Are we agreeing with a negative mind that I deserve better? And that's what happened in this passage. These workers are all grumbling. Grumbling is people talking together in a negative way. They're all grumbling about how they deserve better. Now, Jesus talks to one, probably the one who started the grumbling, but all of them are grumbling together. And I think you can get that at work, where people start grumbling about their work. You can get it in churches, where people start grumbling about their churches. You get it in homes, where families start grumbling about each other. Whatever's happening in the grumbling circle, you get that mindset that all of us are somehow suffering from another bigger source. Look at COVID. You had so many people spreading conspiracy theories of all of the ways that we're all suffering because somebody did this to us. Somebody created this horrible thing, and therefore we are suffering. That mentality that I am miserable because someone else did something, rather than just accepting reality as it is, living our lives with the grace of God, not seeing ourselves as pitiful, miserable, etc. We create our own miserableness when we choose to dwell in assumptions of what we think we deserve, in negative grumbling and frustrated disappointments from those assumptions. Instead of just embracing the grace of God and whatever He blesses us with, we're swirling about in all these negative emotions and comparisons and the fear of missing out. And Jesus said, what God's perspective is, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? God can bless anybody He wants to. If He chooses to make that person a billionaire and you poor, you don't have the right to say, I deserve better. Now, you might can work for more. The billionaire might can give away more. There's all kinds of ways that people respond to their situation, but the reality is none of us deserve anything. We're all sinners, and what we actually deserve is hell. So if God chooses to bless someone financially, or bless them relationally, or bless them with their jobs, or bless them with vacations, and our response is, I deserve better, then our heart is in the wrong place. And we have to remember that God has the right to give to anybody He wants, and we're not supposed to be envious of their possessions or envious of the enjoyment that God is blessing with in His generosity. And then He makes a statement again. So the last will be first, and the first last. I think this is a literal timeline. He's warning us about something that can happen at the end of time. We all know that the rapture is going to happen. God's coming back. He made that very clear. When He comes back, there's going to be a judgment where everyone stands and gives an account for everything that's been done and said and thought in their bodies. At that time, anything that's been done out of our own iniquity is going to burn up, and anything that's been done by the Spirit of God is going to be treasure. And we're going to start with the last and go back to the first. Now, this could mean timeline as in from the rapture day, whoever's the newest Christian on earth, down back to, like, Peter, who was one of the first to ever make the confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. There were probably people, the woman at the well. There were a lot of early converts. So it starts with these new Christians and goes all the way back to the influence of, like, the guys who wrote the Bible. And that's who He's talking to when He says this too. And He warns them, the last will be first and the first will be last. Don't expect, like when you're in the reward part of the end of times, and you see someone who just became a Christian, they got a certain reward, and you're like, whew, I've been a Christian for 100 years longer than them, or I wrote half the Bible, one of the guys Jesus is talking to, and so therefore my treasure is going to be so much better. Now, obviously, hopefully at this point we're all completely redeemed from our lower natures and have new bodies, and Jesus is trying to correct the wrong mindset on earth by teaching the right mindset for heaven. But that idea that I can't look at someone else's treasure that God is giving them and say, oh, that's not fair. I did more for Christ. Because it's the wrong perspective. If I'm walking around saying, I did more for Christ than you did, I deserve more treasure than you, wow, we're in the wrong mind. That is the wrong spirit. We're not thinking about mercy, love, generosity, grace. Wow, look what you did for Jesus. I got to serve Jesus too. Like, what did Paul say? Not Paul. David in the Psalms. And talking about how he longs, it's the song, it's better to have one day in the house of the Lord than 1,000 elsewhere. I just want to be a pillar in the sanctuary, he said. Now that idea of I just want to be useful to God. I just want to be present in the presence of God. I don't need to compare and compete and try to get treasure in heaven, be better than the next guy, It's not that kind of Christian race. The attitude that, big churches are somehow unfair to little churches because they take all the people, or, rich people are unfair to the poor because they've got money. There's so many things that people begrudge and are bitter about because their life is just not as good as somebody else's by their own assumptions. No one ever sees all the messy things of someone else's life. Everyone has a lower nature. Everyone has struggles. Everyone has suffering. And when you start thinking that your life is unfair and you're miserable and everybody else has something good, you're going to be unhappy. You're not going to be as useful to the kingdom, and what you're actually missing out on is enjoying the blessings of God. I don't want to miss out on the beautiful thing that God's doing because I'm stuck in some miserable loop of comparison or bitterness or grumbling on thinking that somehow my life is not fair or that someone else has it better, because that is a waste of a life. How are you going to stand before God one day and He say, why were you always unhappy and miserable and discontent and without joy? Like, because everybody else had it better than me. Like, really? So what I gave you wasn't good enough? You didn't like my gifts? You didn't like how I chose to love you? God knows, as a good Father, why He gives us what He gives us, and why He blesses us in the way He blesses us, and why He uses us in the way He uses us. It's His choice to do what He wants with what's His. We are His. What He does with us is His choice. It is His generosity to bless us. He has the right to do that, whatever He wants, and it doesn't have to be fair. Those are truths of the kingdom that we have to accept if we're ever going to be content. Because as long as I start assuming I deserve more and that God's mistreating me or that other people are mistreating me and I'm envious, begrudging what they have, I'm going to lose my joy, I'm going to lose my contentment, I'm going to lose my peace, and I'm going to lose the satisfaction of just enjoying the life that God has given. Next time you start feeling, wow, I wish I had what they had. I wish I got to have those experiences. I wish it was different. Instead of wishing something was different, pray in joy for that person. Say, God, thank you for blessing them with that thing. Thank you for providing for their needs. Thank you for what you're doing in their lives. That is amazing. And I just pray you keep pouring out your love on them. Acknowledge what God's doing. Rejoice in what God's doing. Practice loving your neighbor, whoever they are. You know, if you're poor and you're looking at the rich and saying it's not fair, they get to have everything they want. Next time say, thank you, God, for blessing those people in that way. Thank you for how you've blessed me. I want to be content where I am and not compare myself to where they are. As long as we think we have the right to be anything in the world, like I have the right to be rich, if he's rich, I can be rich, then we're going to chase riches our whole life. If I think I have the right to be popular, then I'm going to chase respect and popularity. If I think I have the right to be famous, I'm going to chase that. If I think I have the right to certain relationship goals, then I'm going to be chasing that. We got to stop pursuing our rights and start pursuing generous love, acceptance, agreeing with God for what He wants to do in our lives, and then do that with joy. Take our reward and go, instead of looking and seeing how He's treating everybody else and feeling like we've missed out. The last will be first. The first will be last. God does His own thing. He doesn't worry about, is it fair? If He did, Jesus would have never died on the cross. That definitely was not fair. He lives in a mindset of love and generosity that, sadly, most of us don't understand. And we need that Holy Spirit change in our hearts to be transformed into people who can enjoy what we have and be thankful for what other people have too, and seeing that generosity and mercy of God on each other's lives. Think about this week as you're scrolling on Facebook or looking on Instagram or walking through the mall or meeting friends, whatever place you get where you start comparing yourself and feeling like you're inferior, feeling like you don't have value, feeling like somehow you've missed out on what everybody else has, and it could be better if, and what if this was different, when all those attacks come from Satan. Instead, turn it to thankfulness for what you do have, thankfulness for the blessing on others' lives, acceptance on what God's called you to do. You've agreed to that day labor for a denarius, and do it well. And if you happen to be the person who comes in the 11th hour and God blesses you the same, show gratitude. Don't show pride. Don't show arrogance. Be grateful that God gave you that blessing. And those of you who get what you agreed to, be thankful that God was willing to give you that day's work to be able to serve Him. All of us have to choose our mind's position. What am I going to focus on? What am I going to dwell in? Am I going to live in assumptions and greed and comparison and begrudging spirit? Or am I going to live in joy and thankfulness, in hope and in love? That's the kingdom versus a non-kingdom mindset. All right. God bless. Bye-bye.